Hey guys and gals, Cave Dweller here. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make an amiibo from not only one of my favorite game series of all time, but one of my favorite characters. Today I'm going to be showing you how to turn this Wolf Link amiibo into a midna amiibo. So with that, let's get started on how to do it.
So our first step is to pour this in the water. We do this for about 30 seconds just to get rid of the factory oils that might be remaining on it. Alright, so for our second step, we're going to be trying to take this apart. First off, I started using some pliers. I knew the easiest part was going to be the hair of midna, as that one was actually pretty easy, as I was able to pull that off with no problem. The only thing that kind of sucked was I originally didn't want to take apart the head, but I noticed it was the easiest, so I started working on that. But again, I was hoping to take it all in one piece, but when I started using my pliers, I started noticing that I started to damage the midna a bit, so I decided not to do that. Now, it's one of those things when it comes to amiibo, if you're not able to take it apart like I was, you can always put it back in the water to soften it back up. That always helps. Again, I tried to do a mixture between my hands and the pliers. Didn't really want to do that. Finally, I got the midna head off, so that was really good for me. Next was the hard part, which was trying to take apart the midna without really destroying the midna, because again, you don't really want to destroy it if you can. Finally, I was able to get this little tiny bit under there. So what I did next after trying to pull it off was I put it back in the water just to kind of give it some more time to soften up. Whenever you do that, go for about 30 seconds again, or even go longer if you can. This was definitely probably one of the more harder amiibo I tried to take apart. I've had amiibo are always very weird in the fact that you can usually either take them apart really, really easily, or it might take a while. But as you can see, I tried to use my pliers again, but I didn't really want to. I was damaging it a little bit too much more of my liking. In fact, I started noticing the white was starting to peel off the midna amiibo, and that was also another thing that wasn't too concerning because I was going to be repainting it anyways. Again, I was trying to get underneath it any way I could. It was just really difficult to get off, and definitely one of the more harder amiibo I was able to try to take apart. I think. So I realized I didn't record the part where I was able to get her off the wolf link. So what I essentially did was I used a mixture between my hands, the pliers, some hot water to heat it back up, and my X-Acto knife. So once I was able to get that part off, I then started to trim off this stump because I don't need it. I do need the right leg, so I made sure to kind of go around the right leg, trying to guess on where I needed to cut it. So once I kind of cut it around it, I went and grabbed my pliers and I started to pull the stump apart because I don't need the stump. So I was trying to pull it apart and it's actually pretty thick and kind of stuck on there. So I actually had to use my X-Acto knife and kind of cut around it. It was still pretty hard to cut. That plastic is actually a lot thicker than you would think. But once I got that off, I kind of checked to see what I needed to see if there was any parts that needed to be sanded or cut off. There definitely still is, but I decided to work now on the midna head as there's a little bit of extra stump on the hair. So I went ahead and cut that off as well. Again, that part was actually pretty easy. It took a little bit of pressure, but I was able to get it. Alright, so finally after getting that cut, I realized that there was still a little bit extra, so I decided to cut that off as well. And like always, if you don't feel comfortable or if you're not old enough to use knives, always ask your parents or any kind of relatives to do it for you. Anyways, after that, I was trying to decide what to do with the left leg, and I decided to cut it because it is in a more sitting posture, and I'm wanting her to be floating, so I didn't need the leg. So I started cutting, and again, it's more of like guessing on where the hip joint was on both ends, because you don't really see too much of it on the figure. But once I kind of guessed on where to go, I started trimming. I wanted to keep the hand, so I was trying to decide on what to do with that. So next I wanted to free up the hand so that way it'd be easier to get the leg onto the midna figure. So I started to trim. Again, it was kind of like a guessing game because you could see kind of where the hand was. Once I got it off, I realized there was still a little bit too much, so I started to trim off that part off. Once that was trimmed, all right, so once that was trimmed up to the point that I liked, I decided to start trimming the any kind of extra pieces off, like behind her behind area. There's a little bit of the corner pieces that I saw that I needed to trim. But once that was done, then came to the part that I actually like to do, and that is sculpting. Sculpting is probably one of my favorite things to do with a figure because it's, in my opinion, like the most, like, kind of easiest and kind of just the fun part because you can actually start to make things that you want. So for this, what we're going to be making is both the legs as well as the rest of the bracelet or hairpiece connected to her hair. So what you want to do, this is called, it's usually called green stuff, but this is gray stuff. You mix it into a ball, two separate parts, and you mix it into a ball until it's about the same color. Once you do that, then you just get to apply it. In this case, I was... Alright, so now we're going to apply the leg to it. Usually, when it comes to sculpting, I usually do things, put it on and then sculpt, but for some odd reason I decided to do it the hard way and sculpt first and then apply it. And as you're going to see throughout, I keep on readjusting the leg because in reality I should have just waited, but I decided not to, I guess. But anyways, usually it only takes about 20 minutes for the clay to dry, so you do have some working time before it starts to dry up. And if it does start to dry up, you can usually add some water to it and it can help. The thing that I'm using here was a sculpting tool, and it just helps kind of get into the little crevices and things like that. One of the things about this figure is I've never really worked on anything that small. As you saw, I just kind of dropped it, and I'm going to be doing that a lot because it's just so small, it's really hard to grip, and it's just really hard. As you saw, I dropped it again. Alright, so once I got the leg into the spot I wanted it, I decided to just go around and check to see how the leg was doing and kind of fix it. So after that, it's now time to work on the hair bracelet or whatever you want to call that. So I at first, when I did this, thought I made it too small, so I decided to apply a little bit more, but then kind of realized that it was too thick. So I decided to cut just a little bit more, and I still think to this point that I made it still too thick, but it's fine. So I set it there, and then I used my little sculpting tool and kind of just sculpted it until it was about near perfect to the same spot as where that was. And I just constantly did that. I decided to use a different one just so that way I could sculpt, smooth it out a little bit easier. So once I did that, alright, so after that I started smoothing out the other side, and this is at the point when I kind of realized that I made this pretty thick, but it's fine because it's going to be the bottom part, so you won't really notice it. So next up was the little like screws that are attached to this like hairnet bracelet thing. So I put those there, and again, they're going to be at the bottom, so they're not really going to be too noticeable, so you don't really have to smooth these out. So after that, when the clay is hardened, it's now time to file down any imperfections that you might see in the figure. Again, the reason why you want to do this is just so that way it makes it look much better. And again, when you smooth everything out, you usually still have some imperfections, as you can see. So I went ahead and started sanding that down. Again, because this figure is so small, it's actually really difficult to not only hold on to it, but to try to get the file down into the spot you want it. So that was also a pretty hard thing to do. Next, I kind of just went around and looked to see what kind of position I was wanting this in, because I was debating if I wanted to glue the head onto the body first, or do it separately. Alright, so now on to painting. I decided to mix these two colors together, which is Scavian Blight Dinge and Warboss Green. It caused a nice kind of grayish green color, which looks pretty nice and pretty accurate to the way that she looks like in the game more than her figure. So for this, I decided to paint around, but I kind of realized that the big brush that I was using was too big. So I decided to switch, and sadly I dropped it. Again, this is such a small figure, it was kind of just difficult to paint. One thing I will say, I'm not really a big fan of painting. Painting is probably my least favorite thing to do when it comes to customizing. It's kind of not boring, but it's just like a longer process than sculpting. One of the things that I tried to make sure I did was I didn't want to get rid of the patterns that are on our arms and legs, so I decided to kind of paint around it, and I think it turned out pretty good that way. Alright, so next up is her stomach and leg. I used the ceramite white, and I started painting around the stomach area. Decided to use the small brush again, just so that way I wouldn't get into the green any, and it was just a little bit easier. Now, as I said earlier, for some odd reason, after boiling it so much, it actually started to lose its white color, and that's why it's this now limeish green instead of the usual white. So as I've said, the figure is pretty small, and I do wish I would have used my grippers. I do have like a painting gripper, which works out really good. But anyways, as you saw, I've actually almost dropped it a few times, just trying to get the elevation right. One thing as I've said, I'm really surprised is that this white was actually coming off so easily. So I do think I might have just cooked it on for too long when I was boiling it. But I've never seen that in an amiibo, and I just thought it was really weird. So sadly, I realized I didn't record this next part, but I went ahead and painted the leg, as you can see here. Now, ultimately, I decided to actually paint the patterns, and one of the reasons why was I noticed it was having the same problem as the white did, where it was starting to fade away. The color that I used was Hellion Green, and actually it turned out better than I thought it was going to do. I thought because it was going to be so small that it was going to be really hard, but I did find a smaller paintbrush that would be easier to do. Sadly, my camera was being weird and kept on blurring, so you can't really see what I'm doing, but it was doing a lot better than I thought it was going to do. So what I would do is I would put it just barely at the tip of my paintbrush, and I would then quickly rub it on the spot that I wanted, just so that way it wouldn't end up anywhere else. And again, it actually turned out pretty good, and it's one of those things. I actually really liked how it turned out. I did the same for the second end, and this is kind of when I started noticing that the camera was blurring. And again, I don't know why my camera was doing that because it really hasn't done that. It's a fairly new camera, but again, I would just very lightly kind of go over the area that I wanted to. Alright, so once we got the arms done, next up is the legs. The legs were actually the more difficult one just because they were smaller, but it wasn't too bad. I will admit it was kind of annoying and it felt like my eyes were going cross-eyed, but it wasn't too bad. The only one that really gave me problem is the left leg, since that one I actually had to make on my own. But other than that, it wasn't too bad. Alright, so next up was the left leg. The left leg was a little bit more difficult, and it was also a little bit easier, if that makes sense. It was definitely bigger than the left leg, since it was the biggest pattern probably on her body, but it was still pretty difficult just because I had to do it myself by looking at a picture. And as I said, painting is probably my least favorite. To me, I was definitely feeling like I was going cross-eyed, but it actually turned out pretty good. I do wish I kind of did it a little bit better, and I wish the camera would pick up what I'm doing. I don't know if it's the light that you can't that makes it blurry or what, but it's kind of hard to see. You'll see in a few seconds. I turned off the light once I was done, but other than that, I think it turned out pretty good. I see right here. I decided to turn the light off to see if maybe you could see it a little bit better. You really couldn't, but after that, next is the head. All right, so right here we have the head, and what I want to do is I want to drill into the hair. So that's what I'm doing right here. I was drilling. As you can see though, I at first didn't realize that my hand was in the way. So once I realized that, I kind of moved it out of the way. The reason why we're doing this, it actually helps out with structure, because if we didn't have that and we just glued it on there, it may be not as secure as it would be if it was drilled. I also went ahead and started drilling the bottom piece. As you can see, I used, I think if I remember right, a Link amiibo from an old custom that I had done, but I didn't really like how that custom turned out, so that's why I'm using this base now. The two colors that I have here. Alright, so for the helmet, I used Dunstone and Necron Compound. This is actually my second attempt at painting this helmet. The first attempt I did, I made it a little bit too dark, so I decided to lighten up the color by using the Dunstone instead, and I do think this turned out much better than the first attempt. Essentially what I'm doing right now is just kind of going through and painting up the helmet. You could actually still see from the original the Necron, that silver bit, that's the Necron compound. Alright, so for the next step, I went ahead and grabbed my wire, and we're going to be putting the wire into the little hole. Again, the reason why we do that is just to have a little bit more structure. Originally, I was going to go ahead and put the head on, but then I remembered that I needed to paint that bracelet, so I went ahead and painted that real quick. Again, you don't have to worry about the bracelet bottom part, since you're not really going to see it, but at least make sure that it's kind of put together properly, just so that way you can still kind of make sure it's together. But after that, alright, so next up we're going to use that Necron compound, and we're going to use it to brighten up the figure. So what I'm going to be doing here is what's called a technique called dry brushing, and that's where you take the paint and you take as much of it off as possible, and then you quickly brush onto the figure. The reason why we do this is it makes it so that way it doesn't go too deep into the figure, and it only goes mainly on all that texture and detail, and it really brightens it up while keeping the original paint on. And it makes it look really good. In fact, this is probably one of my favorite parts about painting, because it just makes it really look good. Alright, so next up what we're going to do is actually pretty much the opposite of a dry brush. And what we're essentially going to do is we're going to take a darker color and we're going to mix it with water and make it pretty much just nothing but water. And what we're going to do is kind of like the opposite of what we did with the dry brush. And we're going to put it on the figure like before, and we're going to do it super quick. Reason why we do this is it's actually going to go in, it's so wet that it's going to go into the detail. And what we're going to do is once we get it completely finished like this, we're going to take a paper towel and we're going to wipe it down just a tiny bit, kind of dab it. And the reason why we do that is it makes it so that way all of it goes just into the detail and you get a really nice figure like that. Again, this is a technique that I really like doing, and it does make painting a lot more fun, and it's one of my other favorite techniques to do for painting. Alright, so next up we're going to put the head on the base. As you can see, I was having a little bit of trouble trying to get it into the structure itself, the wire structure itself, which is fine. I decided to kind of trim it up a bit, make it so it's a little bit easier. I tried to do this the first few times, and again, it just kind of fell through. So ultimately what I decided to do was see if it would work better if I put it through the hair first and then put it through. So once I got the head to go to the way that I wanted to, next was kind of just check to see if the body would fit. And sure enough, it would still fit, so that's always a good thing. and it was in the spot I wanted. So I went ahead and grabbed some super glue. Essentially what we're going to do is super glue the body back on. The super glue luckily doesn't take too long to settle. The only problem I had was that the body was kept slipping out as it was drying. So that did kind of stink, but I did get it to the way that I wanted it to. So next up was to glue the wire structure onto the base as well as the head. So I added just a little bit of glue onto it. I was going to originally glue the thing to the base first, but then I remembered that it was better to glue the hair. But sadly, I did also glue the thing to my finger, so that's why it took so long. So once I got that there, I went ahead and super glued that. Then went ahead and put it on there, and again, it wasn't too bad. I had to kind of bend the wire back into place a few times, but again, it wasn't too bad. And again, super glue is really easy to stick to the way I wanted it to. Sadly, I kind of realized that it wasn't going to stay on its own, so I went and grabbed some more super glue and I put it at the end of the hair and went and put it standing up like that, so that way it could actually stay. Again, you only have to apply a little bit of pressure for a few minutes or a few seconds, and that's really it.
And with that, you have your own custom amiibo midna. And now it's time to display her on our shelf. And with that, that ends today's video. I really hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed making her. I always like making amiibos, and even though I'm not a professional at it, I love making it. And I really hope that this video has helped you guys want to make your own amiibo of midna, or any of the amiibo that's on my shelf, or of course any amiibo that you want to make. And with that, I'll see you guys on the next episode of the Amiibo Workshop.
Wake up,